Thanks everybody for joining tonight. This is our first run of this, so we've had a few technical issues we're getting figured out right now. We'll try to get a little smoother in the future. So the purpose of tonight is just to give you a little bit of demonstration on what to do with some of the items that we put into your baskets this week. We still good, Isaiah? All right. If you need to change anything, just let me know. So we're gonna start in order. Tonight we're gonna work out the creme brulee that I gave you a recipe for earlier today. So that's the first thing we're going to do. There's just basic ingredients on this one. It's a really great dessert in that it's simple. It's actually probably one of the oldest recorded desserts in human history. There are recipes dating back to the time of the Assyrians and the Sumerians for a dessert of this type. Traditionally, they wouldn't have used egg. They used fish bone and would boil it with the cream to get collagen to set it up. I don't know if I really like that idea, but I do like a cream custard. So we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that put your ingredients together, I'm going to make a double recipe because I'm feeding our retreat guides some creme brulees tonight. But like I said, this is a pretty simple one. So before we get started, I'm going to turn my cream back on so it gets hot. Just going to step over the stove for a minute. Now, I'm going to make an important note for when you're making creme brulee. You want to make sure that if you're using a pan that is not stainless steel, that you don't allow any of the egg mixture to get into the cream in the aluminum pan. It will turn bright green. So it's just a little professional note. We're going to go ahead and mix this in a stainless steel bowl. And the reason I'm doing that instead of an aluminum bowl or a plastic bowl is because of the color tainting that will happen in a reaction. So I've got three ingredients here that I'm going to start out with. We've got my egg yolk that I've separated. Since I did these beforehand, I should probably demonstrate to you how to separate an egg. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that to you to start. So let me go ahead and clear this up. Isaiah, let me know if I need to change my perspective also. All right, so it's pretty simple. We're trying to get the yolk, which is where the majority of the fat is in the egg, and separate it from the protein. So you're going to crack the egg. You're going to let the yolk fall off. Now, if you want to save the whites, you can. They're very rich in protein. You could save them and make meringue. You could use them for an egg white scramble, but I don't know why you want to do that. Basically, just going to separate the white from the egg yolk into the bowl. As little white as possible is beneficial. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and put the egg yolks I put in. In this case, I have 8. For the recipe I sent you, you've got 4 egg yolks separated. In your case, you have a half a cup of sugar. In this case, I've got 1, plus a little to sprinkle on the top. So we'll leave that out. And then I've got, since I don't have any vanilla extract in our kitchen, I have some Irish whiskey. You can substitute for vanilla a little bit of whiskey. Rum is pretty good in this. Orange liqueur is also very good. For those of you that are concerned about the alcohol content, it will bake out. So that's not a concern here, but just adds some residual flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to the mixture here and set these out of the way. Make sure I don't let my cream boil over. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and cream the egg. For those of you who've done some baking, you know what this is. You just want to make sure all the sugar granulars are dissolved, so you don't get any sort of grainy quality in your creme brulee. So take about 5 minutes. So whisk away. It's good arm exercise. I was thinking that I'd make you guys whipped cream this way today, but it's sort of mean. You'll see that the color of the egg yolk changes a little bit as it creams with the sugar. It actually lightens out and loses some of its orange tint. That's how you know it's actually working. So, I typically, if you're wondering why I'm tilting the bowl away from myself, because I don't like getting egg yolk in the face, and often when you're whisking, particulate matter will come off, and makes it harder to wash my clothes when I get dried egg all over it. So. All right, that looks pretty good. You can see there's not a lot of crystallization left at this point. And I'm going to go over and get the cream. So this part's pretty critical. Like I said, you don't want to mix into an aluminum bowl or the color will turn out like this cutting board. It doesn't change anything in the quality of it, just changes the color. So, you know, for St. Patty's Day next year, you can make green creme brulee or cream custard or lemon curd or something like that. It just looks terrible. So I'm going to go ahead and, in this case, I'm going to put about 3 ounces of the cream in and then whisk. And you want to just kind of like whisk it in slowly. If you pour all of the hot cream in too soon, it's just going to start clumping up and cooking. So you basically get clumps of egg yolk instead of a smooth custard, which is not really the best way to have it. So, and then you just want to slowly add it in while whisking. And we're going to continue whisking for about 2 minutes. So. All right, it's going to be pretty loose at this point, and that's normal. That's okay. And it's a pretty simple dessert, like I said. So this is going to move pretty quickly. I think are we recording this video too? So those of you, if you need to come back and review it, you should be able to rewind the video and catch up as needed. So we're going to go ahead and transfer this into ramekins. You can do this, like I said, either in a pie dish. Preferably a shallow pie dish. Coffee mugs work. Anything that's oven safe that you can put in the oven. In this case, we actually have some creme brulee ramekins. So you can see here, I've already preset mine into a water bath. In the description I sent out in the email, I said, you know, fill it up about halfway, 3/4 of an inch with warm water. This serves 2 functions. One, it stabilizes the cooking temperature. It also adds some moisture into the oven, which helps prevent the creme brulee from burning across the top or browning on the top. And you'll see this when it comes out of the oven. If it has too much brown, the sugar won't caramelize properly on top of it. And so it doesn't hurt the creme brulee, it just makes it harder to get that nice glassy finish. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and start ladling it in. I would take it out of the water bath and ladle over the top. So creme brulee, one of my favorite desserts, can be tinted with any sort of flavoring. You can put cardamom in here. You could certainly use the equivalent of a key lime base to make a creme brulee. So you can put some fresh lime juice in here. It actually helps it set up as well. You'd have to whisk it in, of course. If you get any on the rim, just try to like wipe it off so it doesn't burn or stick as you put it in the oven. In this case, I'm just bringing it right up to this rim, this inner marking. You don't want to come all the way to the surface because these will expand in the oven and then retract. And if they expand too much, they're going to burn over the top. And you're going to get like a funky tasting charred creme brulee. So, traditionally, in the French method, they have you do all of this stovetop and then just ladle it into ramekins and refrigerate it overnight. So you would actually bring the egg and cream back to a simmer and thicken it like you would if you're making pudding. At this elevation, nearly 7,500 feet, that's nearly impossible to accomplish well. And so this is a restaurant standard way of producing creme brulee, maybe a cheater's fashion, I suppose. It gives you better consistency, it's harder to screw up. And all right, here we go. Now I'm going to give you a little sort of insider's secret. One thing that will prevent the creme brulee from having a good finish is these air bubbles that have developed on top of it. If you have a torch or like one of the spare airs, or like the kind that you'd use for cleaning out your computer, you can just use anything that's pressurized and just run across the top, and it'll just help dissolve some of those bubbles. The smoother and more bubble-free the top is, the more evenly it will cook. So, So the 3 recipes we're going to be doing today, we're going to be doing all in the same oven. I know that you guys don't have the array of equipment we have. So we've set the oven to 300. That was in the instructions I sent out earlier. For a lot of you who don't have convection, this may take a little bit longer than it takes for us. So I'm going to go ahead and just put these in the oven. Be real careful while you're carrying them. And in they go. And while we work that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next recipe. So, can I get this one of you? Just set it in the sink. It's pretty important that when you move from one recipe to the next that you sanitize your surface. Make sure we're not cross-contaminating anything. Everybody definitely has cross-contamination on their minds right now. All right, the next step is going to be the beef tenderloin. I'm sure a lot of you yesterday, when you got your box, were like, what is this? A gift. Because of the situation in the world right now, beef is at probably the lowest price rate that it's been in my entire professional career. And so this is what they call a choice grade or 3/4 prime tenderloin. So it's just slightly below prime grading. It's about 6.5 to 7 pounds. This is from a 12-month to 14-month aged beef. We're going to go ahead and break this down for you and prepare a classic French dish for you. So I'm pretty excited to do this today. I'm going to go ahead and move this pan out of the way so it's not blocking your view. All right, so the first thing you want to do, I've demonstrated this at home. When I'm working, I typically take a cutting board. At home, if you have a small cutting board, I'd place it over a sheet pan, or if you need to, some towels you don't love, because when you cut into this, it's going to bleed all over the place, and this helps just capture that and keep your space clean. Okay, so typically what I'll do is I'll take and trim just one edge of it, and then over a trash can or into the sink or something, you can drain out some of the liquid. There won't be a ton of liquid in here. Better the beef, the less there will be less liquid because they've aged it longer. I know a lot of you will see this and be like, "Ugh, it's disgusting, blood." It's actually plasma. There's usually very little solid blood left in the system after they butchered it. But anyway, there we go. So first off, let's go ahead and take a look at the tenderloin and talk about all the different parts. Today, the recipe we're producing is called a Chateaubriand. Traditionally, in common practice, a Chateaubriand is the center portion of the tenderloin. This is the prime cut, what they call the center cut fillet. So that is the Chateaubriand. There's 3 different parts primarily to the, I guess 4 parts, but 3 parts or 3 loins as part of the tenderloin. Right down here, we've already taken most of the chain off of this, but you can see a little bit remaining. Often when you go to like Sam's Club or Costco, this will still be connected. It's a real thin piece that runs along the side. It's good meat, but it has really, really tough like sinew around the outside. This is what we call silver. And typically you could just peel that back with your hand. See how tender this is? You could just kind of tear it. You could peel that chain back. And you can see they left some of it here. And this teres minor leads up to what they call the teres major. It's kind of a football-shaped loin at the top. For Anthony, if you're watching, this is the thing that looked like the alien head yesterday on the smoked tenderloin you did for me. Tenderloin you did yesterday, by the way, was fantastic. So thank you for dinner last night. That was great. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take off the portions we're not using today, and then we're going to trim the silver off of this steak. Okay. There is often the mistake in people will say, well, I'm having filet mignon. That technically is actually just this portion here on the bottom end of the filet. This is probably the most tender portion of the filet, but it's not really steak presentable. So oftentimes people will cut this and wrap it with bacon, roll it into itself. But that is the filet mignon. Not all of it is filet mignon. So I had somebody ask me about that yesterday, and I just wanted to clarify that question. So first off, you want to make sure your knife is real sharp. You can use any type of knife. I like to have a knife with enough blade on it that I'm not going to like stab myself unknowingly with the tip of the knife. If you don't have a long knife at your house, just be really careful. Some of this you can peel off by hand without a knife, and I used to work with a guy that could do it with a spoon. I've not been able to recreate that, so I'm not going to demonstrate today. So first what we're going to do is we're just going to trim up the edge of the beef here. You'll see some ridges along the bottom. This is where the tenderloin fit underneath the rib of the animal, and if you don't know where the tenderloin comes from, the prime rib and New York strip come off of the back or the hump of the cow. This is on the inside of the rib cage. That's why it's so tender. It's protected from muscle movement, and is just attached to the inside of the spine. But that's what this is here. Most of this fat on the back side, if you can squeeze it and it breaks apart in your hand, you want to leave as much as that as possible. That's absolute pure flavor. And so, but the stuff like this, it's tough and stringy, you want to take that off. Primarily because you can't cut through it with a knife. Native Americans used to collect this off of animals, dry it, and use it for bowstring. Just to kind of give you an example of what this could be used for and how tough it is. In fact, that's also what they make violin strings out of, and guitar strings in some cases. So we're going to go ahead and trim off the silver. We're going to take off the teres major, and then we're just clean up the loin. So what I would do first is with this facing me, you can see here where the chine has been trimmed off. I'm going to go ahead and start by just kind of working this up and rolling the loin. You can see that this sinew continues up through here, and it comes to like a triangular point right here. You can see that. And so I'm going to separate this here. Okay. Now this piece right here, called the teres major, is actually a really nice piece of meat. You can salvage this for a steak. Another great thing to use it for is for fajitas or stew. If you want to, cook it and shave it, make Philly steaks out of it, do that. Don't throw it away. Don't throw any of this away. So if you wanted to trim this, pieces that you take off is this piece of silver here. And put the tip of your knife in and just press down. You don't want to like force it. You want to keep all of these trim pieces. Some things you could use this for, you could, if you don't want to cook it or take the time to separate everything, you could just boil it overnight in hot water with some herbs and salt to make a really good beef stock. You could use this for stew or just to drink, really full of antioxidants and all sorts of collagen, which I think is a pretty good thing for people to have these days. But that piece you want to save, okay? So you can save the top end of the fillet here, use that for fajitas. The teres major, if you're going to use it as a steak, I typically will bisect it like this, and you'll cook it like a flat iron. And so you'll cook it this way and then just cross cut it. So I'm just going to save those for later. I'm also going to go ahead and trim up the edge of this. You see how there's a little bit of like just flange. I'm just going to take and clean it up so it looks nice, presents well. I'm going to take a little bit of this connective tissue off the back. And then we're going to go ahead and take the filet mignon off after we take off the silver. So as you can see, you're just going to take the tip of your knife, put the filet at sort of an angle away from you. You're going to put the tip in, and then you can just pull it and to touch it with the knife. So you kind of like fillet out, and then and you can do this either direction. This is just how I've learned to do it. It's easier for me from a hand movement perspective. Also depends on the angle of the beef. So when I'm facing down here, I'm going to go ahead and change it around for the next side so I'm not pushing down towards myself. And it's tough enough, you can put the blade's angle towards the silver so you're not losing a lot of meat. I actually will save that as well, and we can use that for beef stock. So you boil that down as well. That's where a lot of the collagen is that you want in a stock. Give some of that depth of flavor, good nutrients. We're just going to keep taking that silver off till this is completely clean. All right. Do you have any questions at this point? Still good?
Maybe just slow it down a tad notch with the request.
Okay.
Just tell some cool facts.
What'd you say?
Just tell some cool facts again.
Cool facts, okay. Traditionally, the Chateaubriand was, they take the center cut of the filet, and then because they weren't cooking in temperature controlled ovens, they would wrap it in a cheaper cut of meat. Sometimes they'd use mutton or like a piece of like top round or something to prevent it from, to allow it to roast inside the coals or the heat of the fire without it overcooking. And then before service, they take that off and discard it. So, see how clean that looks now? I'm just going to take all that connective tissue off. You see how, like, with the filet mignon, how flat it is? This is really amazing tender meat. Like, look how tender it is. I'm just able to pull off this product here. So, like, finish cleaning it up just a little bit. This portion here should be really good to serve very heartily about 8 people, or 2 people if you're my size and you like beef. So Patton can eat the whole thing himself. So it's I was really impressed. I cooked filet the other day for our kids. My 8-year-old ate an entire like 12-ounce filet and then asked for seconds. So it's you can decide how much of the fat to leave on depending on your dietary preferences. And then, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and take off the mignon, and we're going to save that for later. That's going to be a great steak, like steak and eggs in the morning. Like I say, use it for, as you could definitely use it for fajitas, definitely bougie fajitas in that regard. Often what you'll see in stores is they'll have taken this and wrapped it on itself like this, and then wrapped it with bacon, and that way you can sear it like a steak without it falling apart. So you see those bacon wrapped fillets in the store, that's the tail end of the meat, it's not the prime cut. So I'm also going to go ahead and take a little bit of this top off just for even cooking, and save that of course later as well. I like using tenderloin because it only has about a 10% loss of yield, whereas if you're using prime rib, like a ribeye loin or a New York strip or a sirloin, you're going to lose maybe 40% of the meat to just trim when you're getting it ready. Okay. So next step, I'm going to change my gloves and get some spices. So in your package yesterday, I gave you guys a package of spice. This is pretty simple. It's just salt, pepper, cumin, thyme, fresh rosemary, garlic, and a little bit of paprika for color. And you can really use any sort of rub that you want. One mistake that people often make in salt blends or when they're seasoning meat is they over salt it. Everybody's been to a New Year's Eve party where somebody's got a salt encrusted rib loin. Salt does a couple things. Traditionally they use salt to preserve meat. The reason they use it to preserve meat is it's really good at pulling all of the moisture out of the thing that you're eating. You use it to salt fish, salt meat, pull all the moisture out, it won't spoil. Salt will serve the same function on the meat you're working with here while you're cooking it. Obviously we want the flavor enhancing qualities of salt, but if you use too much, you're going to dry out the surface meat. It's going to cause it to be tough, and it'll lose some of the flavor anyway. So we're going to go ahead and just start on one side, and we're just going to do a light sprinkle. Just sprinkle and rub across it, okay? You should still be able to see the meat when you're done, okay? And just roll it over. You do the same thing on this side.
Brad Ashwell asked, is it okay if his now looks like carne asada?
Sure, if that's how you want to eat it. It's your meat. So, all right. And then after seasoning it, I'm going to do one more layer of seasoning on this, but before I do that, I'm going to oil it. I'm just going to put a little olive oil on the cutting board. I prefer olive oil or avocado oil just from a flavor perspective. It actually has some flavor. I typically stray away from canola or soybean because when you cook it and it gets hot, it develops sort of a sour, rancid flavor that I'm not fond of. So just to kind of keep it as clean as possible. Avocado is a great option if you're going to put it on the grill, because it has a really high heat tolerance. So we're just going to kind of oil that a little bit like this. All right. So kind of like rolled it out, kind of nice and round, and we're just going to go ahead and season it one more time. Now, one thing that we need to make sure we do, make sure you season the end. I got on Isaiah's case yesterday for that, so it's or the other night. So, all right. So there's two things you can do with it now. If you wanted to pre-prep this for another day, you could just wrap it in plastic wrap, put it back in the fridge. We're going to go ahead and just put it in the oven while the creme brulee is cooking. This is going to cook at 300 degrees. When we pull the creme brulee out, we're going to raise the temperature in the oven to 400. In a lot of cooking books from the 1960s into the 80s, little piece of trivia for you here. Most roasts, they recommend you cook at an extremely high temperature first, and then turn it down for a slow cook time. It's actually backwards, and it wasn't something that was intentional. Everybody here probably remembers having the red and white checked Betty Crocker cookbook that came out in 1956. Fantastic little cookbook. Some of the best cookie recipes I have came out of that. But their instructions for cooking a prime rib recommended doing it with high heat first. It was a typo that they discovered after production. Never went back to pull it off market, and people have been doing it that way ever since. From a thermal perspective, you want the internal temperature to be even. In this case, we're going to try to cook this to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we're going to rest it, and that will give you a rare steak. If you want to cook it a little bit longer, please certainly cook it as hot as you'd like it to be. Keep in mind it's going to increase by 10 to 15 degrees after you take it out of the oven as it rests. But yeah, traditionally they would do high heat and then low heat. My preference is to do low heat and then high heat at the end just to sear the top. And if you do it too hot in the beginning as well, all your herbs will burn, and then you'll just get a charred, dried out piece of meat. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and transfer this to a pan. You could do this in a saute pan if you want. You could do it on the grill. In this case, we're just going to put it in a hotel pan, just right in the center. I'm going to go ahead and stick this in the oven, put a thermometer probe into it so we can monitor the temperature while we're cooking. So. Probe just makes it so I can't screw it up on camera. So gotta get the probe in there. The laser almost done. So, all right. Now we're going to move on to the next stage. We're going to do some potatoes for you, and while the beef is cooking, the creme brulees are about ready to come out. Probably another 10 minutes.
Julie was asking, Chef, do you happen to have a cow joke?
A cow joke? I don't know if I do. Do you have any cow jokes?
I don't.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure I'll think of one here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and clear off this cutting board and then reset up. So. And then can I give this to one of you to just put in the refrigerator so we can use it? All right. Go ahead and sanitize our station. So I'm going to go ahead and use this little oven, stove to do this part of the demonstration. If I can get it to work.
Question came out, what temperature should the oven be at right now?
It should be at 300 degrees currently, so it's all right. All right, so I'm just going to do a pretty simple potato recipe. I've preheated this pan just because for the sake of time expediency. You can use a saute pan. My preference would be that, but we don't have great saute pans in our commercial kitchen where you typically are feeding hundreds of people. And so I have this nice cast iron. If you're using a cast iron pan like this or something that's non-stick, just make sure you have adequate oil. And this dish is going to get partially cooked here until the potatoes are browned, and then we're going to put it back in the oven, just let it finish off in the oven while the beef is cooking. All right, so we've got a couple things here that were in your case yesterday. I gave everybody an herb compound butter. This is just salted butter with fresh garlic, rosemary, a little bit of thyme. It has a little bit of cumin in it, and a little bit of salt and pepper. So pretty simple. I gave you a lot of this with the intention that you could use it for the potatoes. You could also use it on the French bread I gave you, and of course you could use it to top the steak when it comes out of the oven. So just melt a little butter over the top. Typically, I don't put a lot of anything on my fillet, but sometimes a little butter is nice to kind of just brighten it up a bit. So we're going to take half of this butter. Go ahead and fill the spoon. And we're going to go ahead and start melting it in the pan here. So we're going to do what's called a semi-confit potato. This seems like a lot of butter. We use all this butter, this many potatoes, okay? Butter tastes good. There's a reason that food that comes out of a restaurant tastes better and has more calories. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and throw that in the pan. Give it a nice toss. Try to make it as easy as possible for you. If at this point you want to add some like chili pepper or add some additional fresh herbs, you can. And we're just going to let these simmer for a minute. I'm going to stop moving them around until they start to crisp up on the bottom. So, any other questions while we're waiting?
Your question came in, should they dice their potatoes?
They could dice them. I prefer cutting them lengthwise in quarters. It gives more surface cover to absorb butter. So really the only purpose there is to collect more butter out of the pan. It's also going to cook a little faster. You can certainly dice them if you want to go that far. I tend to like a little more body, and with these two types of potatoes, so this is a Yukon Gold. This is what I gave you in your baskets. This is a full wax potato. It just means it has more natural waxes in it, unlike a russet that's very dry and fluffy. Different types of potatoes have better function for different things. If you're going to pan fry or oven roast a potato, I recommend using a medium to high wax potato. So that's a high wax. These red potatoes here are medium wax potato. And these are going to retain more mouthfeel, like moisture, when you cook them. Whereas if you were to do this with russets, they're just going to like collapse and fall apart and get mushy. I'm not sure if anybody's noticed this, but if you tried to make mashed potatoes with just Yukons and you whip them, they almost turn into paste, and that's because of the natural wax content in the potatoes. So, and yeah, I don't know if you can see some picture here. You can see like a little bit of fond is starting to develop on the bottom of the pan. For those of you who don't know that term, the fond, the basis of the word like fondue or fondant, is the butter kind of caramelizing with the starches on the bottom of the pan. If you're making fondant, you'd be using, almond flour and butter, or you'd be using wheat flour and butter. Or if you're making fondue, you'd be using roux and then adding cheese to it. So roux is butter and flour, basically cook into a paste. So that's just going to sort of stabilize the flavor and allow the butter not to get oily and separated when we bake it. So we're going to cook it down with the raw potatoes. It's collecting the starch off of the potatoes. That's going to create a natural sort of fond. So, still going on there? Heat. That does not have quite the BTUs I'm used to. So. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the creme brulees while we're waiting for this to cook. All right, so these maybe got a little bit too hot. If you have anything that flies onto it, now's the time to take it out. You see how some of these started to develop sort of a brown surface coat. These are fine. Like this one is probably better. This is better. This is better. This one's gone a little too far. So just an example of, let's see how they're jiggling but not wet. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and stick these into the refrigerator. So at the end, we can caramelize them and eat them. So that's the best part. All right, I'm going to go stick these in the cooler. Grab the door for me. Okay, like I said before, at this point we're going to go ahead and crank up the temperature in the oven. Most of you probably don't have this sort of fancy oven in your kitchen. Maybe someday in the future. It's not that far off. We're going to bring it up to 400 degrees. You can see here on this, I don't know if you can see this, but I have a probe inside my steak. Right now we're at 63 degrees. Let's set it to 120 degrees. So if you have a thermometer at home, maybe you have one like this. Sometimes you'll have one with a top-down dial. These are great for cooking to help you prevent overcooking. You know, trust the math, trust the science when it comes to cooking. So we're going to cook this steak to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So at this point, we have some waiting to do. I'm going to finish off these potatoes, and then probably it's going to be another 20 minutes for that steak to get in there. So if you're feeling a little behind, now's your time to catch up. Okay, so we're going to finish the potatoes, and then we'll take a pause for a minute, and then come back in about 15. All right, we're really getting a good fond now. So you see the bottom of the pan here. Let's see if I can not start a fire. Get a little bit of crust building on the bottom of the pan. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and put these in the oven, but first I'm gonna take the rest of that butter. So this is gonna just kind of like settle in there without it being as hot. I don't want it to separate, so lots of butter. All right, give it a good coating, let the butter melt. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the oven with the beef. All right. Now we wait. Lots of hurry, 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 just to wait. So, any other questions while we're waiting? Oh, what we should do for a second is we talk about when those creme brulees are cooled off. If you put them in the refrigerator immediately out of the water bath, they should cool off in about a half an hour. They don't hold temperature very well. Some people might have one of these at home. I know Meredith probably has one at home. She does a lot of cooking. Her and Josh are excellent cooks. And but if you don't, maybe you have a butane torch or a propane torch for construction. Those will work. I do not recommend the MAP fuel and the yellow tanks. They're way too hot. So for those of you that don't have a torch for caramelizing your creme brulee, you certainly can do it under the broiler in your oven. You just want to make sure you leave the door ajar so that the ambient temperature doesn't get too hot. And make sure you pay attention to it time-wise, because it will go from not being melted to burning in just a matter of a few seconds. So just keep an eye on it, and as it starts to caramelize, pull it out. So, all right. What do we do now? Do some like bonus recipes of some type. French omelet. My daughter has taught herself how to make a French omelet from Julia Child's cookbook. It's like the proudest moment of my life. She's like, Dad, I'm going to make omelets tomorrow, but I'm not going to put anything in them. I'm like, so you're making a French omelet? She's like, yeah, just like Julia. So yeah.
So chef, so how did you get into cooking? Like what made this become a passion?
It's a good question. I've cooked from a very early age. I grew up in, I guess, what some people would consider a culinary family. Now that I understand that my upbringing was different than most, it doesn't, it seems a little more strange. Like, as far as back as I can remember, my parents were growing a garden, and my dad hunted quite a bit, so we always had fresh game. They foraged, and maybe it was because they wanted good ingredients they couldn't get in the grocery stores in the places we lived. Many of you are not old enough to remember only being able to get apples and oranges in the grocery store, and now we have so many varieties of fruit and vegetable, mostly raised regionally, that it's sort of spoiled us, I think. It's a fantastic improvement in the environment. But I do have some pretty clear memories of me just like standing on the countertop, turning on the KitchenAid mixer while I made cookies with my mom. Now that I have kids of my own, I'm really surprised she let us do some of the things we did. Like at 3 or 4, I was operating the oven and making cookies. And my 5-year-old would definitely do it if you let her, but she'd also burn the house down. So she's certainly tried a few times. So not on purpose, but
Got a couple other questions here too. Jenny Coleman, my dessert isn't done yet.
Right, just leave it in the oven. You can keep the steak in there too. So, like I said, for a lot of the conventional ovens at home, this is going to take a lot longer than it does in our convection oven. So, you just want to leave it in there until it doesn't jiggle. If you need to cover it, if it starts to brown too soon, you can certainly put a little bit of aluminum foil over the top of the pan, just to prevent heat from touching it. So,
And I think you already answered this, but Clayton asked, did you add the rest of the butter into the potatoes? And I believe you did.
I did, yes. In your case, you have more butter than me. You might want to save some out for your bread.
And then Johnny Barra said, have you ever studied any molecular gastronomy?
I have. I played around with molecular gastronomy quite a bit, and I have decided there's some really great things to learn and do with it. I find that in a lot of modern, like nouvelle cuisine restaurants, that it gets overdone. You lose some of the sort of character of food. I think there's something to be said about gathering around the table, eating stuff that's very simple but flavorful. As a philosophy of cooking, I like to know where my food comes from. I believe God's given it to us as a gift to nourish us. It's one of the few things that we have to have. Obviously, you have to have water, you have to have sleep, and you have to have food. Everything else is optional. And food is one of those things that not only do we have to have it, but God has designed us in such a way that it also gives us joy and pleasure. And I think that's a gift. So I try to keep it as clean as possible. I certainly have used a lot of agar-agar and, soy lecithin in recipes. But we used to do, in one of the restaurants I worked at, we did tequila pearls with like a full margarita inside the pearl. We just drop it into somebody's glass. And so as they're drinking it, they get this extra shot of tequila. And it's a lot of fun stuff you can do with it. Olive oil pearls, certainly setting up gels and gelatins. Yeah, I certainly have.
Next question, what is molecular gastronomy?
It's the use of scientific and chemical ingredients in modifying and transforming food into different visual subjects. And so, like, for instance, you could take olive oil and you could use molecular gastronomy to make it into a crisp or into a cracker or into a ball that you could put in your mouth that has the texture of creme brulee. You can basically, it's the idea of like toying with your food chemically. So kitchens these days are like half lab, half kitchen. And like some of the best places I've worked have had wood-fired ovens on one end of the kitchen. On the other end, we've got sous vides and vats. And so a lot of fun stuff to do. But yeah.
How long are you cooking the potatoes in the oven for?
I'm going to cook them probably about 25 minutes or until they're tender. It's a little different depending on what elevation you're at. We're at 7,500 feet, so things don't cook as fast. They'll probably come out of the oven about the same time as the tenderloin. So, all right, so you can see here we're already at 20 degrees from where we were before. So it's a nice thing about a convection oven. I know some of the ovens at camp do have a convection function, or what they call a quick bake function. Another thing that you can do if you find that your oven cooks unevenly is that before you're baking something or put something in, you can put a little pan of water in the bottom of the oven, and that's just going to stabilize the temperature throughout it because water conducts heat a little better, and so it just kind of holds it into the steam in the air. So that's why if you live in the south and the sun goes down, or you go under a tree, it's still as hot as it was in the sun. New Mexico, if you go into the tree, it's 30 degrees. You go out in the sun, it's 75. So that moisture transmits the heat a little bit better than just the dry air. So, all right. All right.
Little break.
Yeah, take a little 10-minute break. So we're going to go ahead and turn off the live feed for 10 minutes. We're going to come back here and finish up. Good cooking. All right. Let me drink water. right, welcome back everybody. Hopefully you've got everything in the oven and things are starting to cook. For those of you who have wine at home, this is a great meal for a bourbon barrel aged Cabernet. So Clayton Knight, you can open that bottle I gave you the other night, so it's a good one. All right, so our temperature on our steak has hit 120 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and pull that out and kind of show you what it's going to look like at that finish point. So. All right, so here we go. Now, like I said, this is 120 degrees. This is going to be very rare. It's just a preferential thing for me. Now, if you have people in your household, some that like rare, some that don't like it rare, obviously the end cuts are going to be more well done. The other option, and if you're not going to use the whole thing tonight, you can always cut it into steaks and then sear it to finish it off. I would recommend that over putting it in the oven longer, as far as just maintaining moisture and having a better cut of meat. So, but you can see here, it's very little moisture has left off of this. What we did is in adding the oil as the second stage of the seasoning, it encrusts a little bit faster and you don't get bleed out. And so all that moisture is still inside the steak, which is fantastic. Now we're gonna let this rest for probably about 5 to 8 minutes before we cut into it. Over 210 degrees, all the collagen and fat inside this steak is gonna liquefy. And if it's too hot, it will bleed out when we cut into it. So we want to make sure we maintain moisture. So everybody's had a steak, and you can take it right off the grill, you cut into it, and just liquid goes everywhere. And you're like, why is my steak so dry? Because you left most of it on the cutting board. So we're going to just leave it here. Now, if you had cooked this in a saute pan in the oven, you could then take some wine or something and deglaze the drippings in the bottom of the pan to make a little jus for it. You can still do that now if you want. I'll just take this out first before you do it. But we're just going to go ahead and take that out. It is hot. Don't do what I'm doing. Use a pair of tongs. But we're just going to let this rest. If you do not have a thermometer at home, there is a really good way that you can test the doneness of your steak without a thermometer. In general, if it's a steak quality piece of meat like a ribeye or a filet, it's going to have a give to it. And the way to compare that, you take your hand and you do like this. That's rare, okay? Medium rare, medium, and you should throw it away, okay? Well done. So, but if you don't, that's pretty accurate within a margin of some error. But if you're not sure if it's done enough and you don't have a thermometer, instead of cutting into it, potentially losing some moisture, or sticking into it to lose some moisture, that's a good gauge of it, just to kind of see, the firmness of the steak. If it's much floppier than that, I put it back in. So,
So I think it's a good time. There is a cow joke, I guess, that did come up.
Sure.
That
Okay.
the meat's sitting on there.
All right.
What do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef.
All right. I like that one. I like the airplane one better. Megan? Blake? Was it Molly? Yeah. That is a Molly joke, isn't it? Why did the airplane crash?
Another question.
The pilot was a loaf of bread. Yeah, perfect joke right there. So,
But this is a serious question.
Okay.
That Bradley asked.
yes.
How many alcoholic beverages must be consumed during the preparation of this meal?
A good French chef would drink a full bottle of wine. So, more than that, you're not going to make it to the table. So, thanks, Brad, for that question. If you're drinking beer, just sip on it and stay hydrated because the kitchen gets hot, And while we're talking about alcohol and cooking with alcohol, never cook with alcohol you wouldn't drink. You do need to know what all the elements of your dish taste like. If a recipe calls for wine, I would never, ever use what's labeled as cooking wine. The reason they're able to sell cooking wine in the sauce section of a grocery store is they add salt to it. It's usually a sodium brine. It's really low grade. There's a lot of chemical traces in it, and it just tastes horrible. So use something that you would drink if you're cooking. If you're not a wine fan, use beer. You can use whiskey. If you're going to deglaze a pan, just use some sort of element that you like. If you don't drink alcohol at all, don't want to use it in your recipes, other things you can use to deglaze a pan or to make a sauce could be like a bone stock, beef or chicken stock, vegetable broth, things like that. So, yeah, Mike's Hard Lemonade, sure.
So a few questions are still coming in regards to the creme brulee, chef.
Yes.
It's still not cooked yet. Do we need to cool the creme brulee before we put it in the fridge?
No, I just put it straight into the refrigerator. Just make sure you take it out of the water bath. Just it'll help it cool down a little faster. It will still have a little jiggle to it. So, who is it? Is that Jenny asking again?
Steph Rasmussen.
Okay. I guess this is another good point. One thing that I had to do when we lived up in the other house at 304, I bought an oven thermometer. Like my oven consistently was 20 degrees lower than it said on the dial, and so it might be worth investing into like a $3 oven thermometer you can just leave in the oven, so you can make sure that the temperature is actually accurate. So most conventional ovens sit far below what their digital readout says. That's because the thermostat in it is going to be up against the sidewall where it's hot in the metal, and there's no air circulating, so you get pockets of cool. So. Yeah, no stress if it isn't cooled enough. By the time you're done with meat, plating, eating dinner, you should be good to eat it. Or you can have another bottle of wine and then eat it later. So, all right, let's go ahead and check our potatoes. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, those are not terrible looking potatoes. So, all right, you can see here. Got a nice caramelization on them, but not too much. Potato itself is soft, but not mushy. Cut into it's got a little bite in it still. And we're gonna go ahead and plate this with the beef. I'm just gonna go ahead, after these cool, I want it to cool enough that the butter that's loose here kind of sticks to the potatoes a little bit more, because I don't want to leave that in the pan. I'm just gonna set this to the side for a minute. Of course, just assume everything's hot. I got a couple burns on my arms from the other day just touching the oven door. Even professionals forget that things are hot and you touch things. So certainly have had lots of burns and scars in my career. So
People loved your idea for the oven thermometer. They said that was very helpful.
right, we actually have like 40 of them at the other dining hall. So if they want one,
Maybe we'll put it in their basket.
yeah, we'll put an oven therm in your basket next week. So. The other thing people should do is they should keep a thermometer in the refrigerator. Most conventional refrigerators, they just have a number dial, but it doesn't tell you how cold it is. It's like you can tweak it. So you want your beer, Brad, if you want your beer super cold, you have your oven right at 40 degrees, without freezing up your vegetables. So it's definitely worth spending the $2 to $3 to buy one and just stick it inside. Also, just to make sure your food's not going to make you sick. All right.
And then spouses and couples are wondering if they could hire you to do a cooking class.
Absolutely. It's really expensive. I'm just kidding. Just buy me a bottle of wine and pay for the food anyway. So, yeah, I guess we could do a little shameless plug. Isaiah and I did dinner for a couple here at camp last week. Just sort of a chance to stay busy and keep cooking and practice good recipes. And so we cooked for a couple. They paid for food and they just left us a little tip afterwards. So it's just it's kind of a fun way to keep busy and keep us cooking during the downtime. It's really, to be honest, it's a little hard to go from producing thousands of meals in a day to nothing, and to be all ramped up and ready to go for retreat season and then going towards summer with the prospect of not lifting a knife. It's pretty depressing. So appreciate you guys indulging us and letting us do this. So hopefully everybody's having a good time. If you have not signed up for Food Basket and you're watching this and you're in the Glorieta community, you should. Going forward, we're going to continue having sort of meal themes. They're going to be paired with a recipe, maybe a video demonstration, just kind of help keep people growing and learning during this time. And we may even throw an angle at you and give you like a vegetarian or vegan meal, and or a plant-based meal of some type. And so keep people in the know of all the options of things out there to eat. So, all right. So we're going to go ahead and This is probably rested long enough. We're gonna go ahead and cut into it. First look. So I typically like to cut into the center. If I'm portioning it out, I'll cut into the center, then I'll cut again, and then you can cut it again depending on the number of people you're serving. So, and typically when you're cutting, your knife should be sharp enough you don't have to press. Any pressure you put on it as you cut is going to push all of that collagen and fat and liquid out of the meat, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, so just kind of like slide it. All right, there we go. Get that medium rare. 120 degrees, rested 10 minutes. Temperature came up 15 degrees, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and slice it. We're going to put it on the tray here with potatoes, and then we're going to come back to the creme brulee. So you cut it into about a 3/4, 5/8 to 1 inch slice. It's going to be pretty easy to cut with just a dinner knife. It's just super tender. For those of you who like the well done cuts on the end, I mean, oh, that's not terrible at all. Wow. We got a group of people standing here looking at it like we're ready for dinner. So, all right, so I'm going to kind of lift that out of the drippings. I'm just going to place this on the tray here. If you're going to present it, you could certainly go ahead and just kind of fan it out a bit so people can see what they're getting into. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and take these potatoes. Still pretty hot. And don't worry, Blake, I will keep some separate for you. We're just going to keep those, and then you just take it right into the middle of the table for you. So, all right.
Back to the creme brulee, chef.
Yeah.
If it's not done, do you recommend that they raise the temperature on their oven?
No, not at all. If you raise the temperature, you're going to burn the creme brulee, and it will get grainy. So just be patient with it. Set a timer, come back and check it every 5 to 10 minutes. And at this point, if you're working the creme brulee and it's still not done, your steak is probably not done either, so no hurry. All right, and before you put your food out on the table, just wipe the plate. Really splatter around. Okay.
And then Clayton wanted you guys to know that you and Isaiah, he said you guys cooked him an incredible meal.
Thanks. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit more of this compound butter on here. Just to where I can reach it. I've got long arms, but not that long. Anyway. Yeah.
And it looks like, Chef, we have some of our internationals on watching, like Victor and Christian.
Hey, Victor. How you doing? Mientes.
And Christian.
Christian, you're not working tonight? You guys can be praying for Christian. He's driving bus. That's what he does for work. He's a transport driver, and he's still been working during this entire pandemic. So far, so good. He stayed safe, but heat on that butter. Everybody should invest in one of these. For 20 bucks, it is the best tool in your kitchen. And it's great for starting campfires. It's excellent for starting a cigar. If you're going snow camping, this will be your savior. All right. Hey, Molly, do you want to grab plates and forks and knives? And we'll feed you guys. This is really why I work in kitchens. Someone asked me earlier how I got into kitchens. I like knives and fire. And, the other options for things that play with knives and fire didn't really appeal to me. So, all right.
What's your favorite meal to cook at home?
I really love cooking like Asian cuisine, like Thai and Vietnamese food. Those of you that come to my house to eat have certainly had Indian food with me. And Brandon's had it numerous times at my house. We typically keep it pretty like street food oriented when we have people over at our house, so like curries or like pad thai or tacos. or something of that nature. I like bright colors with my food, and so, wow, it's not bad.
Pancake brick, yeah.
Yeah. The tech. Here we go.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So, just gonna towel real quick and wipe this up. All right. Any other questions? Let me go ahead. Just move this out of the way. All right. You can always garnish with a little, if you want to impress your guests, you can put a little rosemary on it. And before you take it to the table, you just torch the rosemary a little bit too. It opens up the essential oils. Rosemary stimulates the appetite, the sense of hunger. And so you'll see a lot of super fancy restaurants of little burning sprigs of rosemary on the table when they start their coursing. And that's why. You can smell it, right? All right, there we go. All right, so while those of you are still working on your recipes, we're going to go ahead and show you how to caramelize your creme brulees, and then we're going to sign off and have dinner. So we'll be back in just a second.
Hey Chef, there's people asking, they want to know what to do with the corn mix that we gave.
So the corn mix, you can just throw in a saute pan with a little olive oil. It's already seasoned for you. You don't even have to use oil if you want to just reheat it. If you want to, you can microwave it. I don't love that idea, but it works, and it's just ready for you to use. And if you were, plating it family style, you can just pour it right down the center over the meat and the potatoes. Yeah, it's already seasoned. Right now, as it is, there's no dairy. Just has a similar spice mixture to the beef. So cumin, black pepper, chili powder, salt, obviously, and garlic. So, and a little fresh cilantro chopped up in there. So, yeah. And for those of you that have spice aversion, the green chilies in that mix are very mild, so it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. All right, we got creme brulee. And who has had creme brulee before? And who has not had it? You've never had it? You've had it. You've had it. You've had it. You guys have had it here, so. All right.
So I'm the only one.
Really, Megan, this will be the best day of your life.
Okay.
Anyway, unless you don't like eggs, anyway, or cream, or dessert. In case it will not be the best
I
day of
like
your life.
all of
those things. So, all right. So when we're doing creme brulee, there's a couple elements. Obviously, safety first. If you're using a torch, be aware of your surroundings. I had a chef once almost burn my restaurant down because he had the torch on and he set it down on the counter with the flame towards the wall. And I don't know if anybody knows what FRP is. It's fire retardant panels. That's what this whiteboard is in the kitchen. So it was blowing against one of these FRP boards and I could just smell burning plastic. And I kept thinking somebody had dropped something in the stove or in the fryer. And I look over and there's just like burning plastic going up my wall. And so he had a butane torch just kind of melting there. Been there probably 5 minutes. So he's doing creme brulees and just setting the torch back down and doing them and setting it back down and just completely oblivious to the fact that his station was on fire. So, but yeah, so be aware of your surroundings. I know a lot of people's kitchens are small. They have a paper towel roll or curtains or something that you love, like a nice towel that your grandmother embroidered for you. This will destroy that, so I recommend you don't use that to hold it. So the reason I bring up the towel is that typically when I'm caramelizing creme brulee, if you have a torch at home for this method, you want to hold it in something to just insulate your hand. Hot pad. If it's a cotton towel, it is pretty fire retardant. I prefer a towel to a hot pad. I just find that they are a little bit easier to handle and use shape-wise, and I burned myself fewer times with them, so I guess that goes to say. So before we start, typically I'll take a towel and just kind of clean up the inside so that when we start torching it, you don't get as many burnt pieces up on the rim, just from a presentation perspective. This is a great dessert to serve plain. You can certainly serve it with a few like fresh berries if you'd like. I know people that will garnish it with, drizzled chocolate or something like that as well. I think that's a little overdoing it, but it's a really simple dessert. It's gluten-free, so it's easy for people to use. It's cheap to make. Most of you right now in your houses have ingredients that can make this. You don't have to use heavy cream. If you want to use milk or half and half, you can, or almond milk or coconut milk. You can certainly do it to make it dairy-free. Doing it vegan's a little more difficult. That's where that molecular gastronomy comes in. There's a product called agar agar. It's like it comes from the red sea kelp. It's called carrageenan, and you can use that to make vegan creme brulee if you want. So, and it doesn't taint the flavor that much at all. But yeah, so if you don't have a torch, we're going to do the first part of this procedure, and then you're just going to put it as close to the burners in your broiler as you can. Obviously, if you're still baking these or baking your beef, don't worry about this yet. And do not put the sugar on them until you're ready to do it. If the sugar dissolves into liquid, it will not caramelize, okay? If it dissolves cold. If it dissolves under the power of flame, it's a whole different story. So, all right, so we're just gonna put about 1.5 teaspoons on each one of these creme brulees. You don't need a lot. And then you're just gonna kind of take and tap it around. Just kind of try to spread it out evenly as much as possible. You can see the one that doesn't have as much brown on it spreads out a little easier. It's more even. So, and then you're going to want your creme brulee torch at sort of a medium heat, not all the way up. And when you go in at it, you're going to start at a distance to just start warming it. And you're going to kind of rotate the creme brulee ramekin in your hand as you go. You can see where holding the towel there is important. You see the sugar starting to melt and ball up. It starts to liquefy. If you need to like stop and rotate, keep in mind that the edges of that are going to be super hot. Kind of like let the caramel kind of spread around. Oh yeah, there we go. And there we go. 4 seconds, pretty good. You do want it to be like a medium to dark caramel color. The word creme brulee just means burnt cream. So it is definitely what you're looking for, is that sort of toasted marshmallow flavor. So this is gonna set up as it cools into a glass that you'll be able to break open with a spoon. Creme brulee, as far as desserts go, has the least amount of sugar per serving. For an entire quart of cream, I use just under a cup of sugar. Compared to a cake, similar portions would have twice as much sugar. So it has sort of the impression of being sweet because you have this little bit of sugar glass on top of it. In some traditional recipes, they don't add sugar at all to the batter, and then they just rely on the sugar from the top to sweeten it. So.
A lot of people are saying, Chef, this is so much fun. Can we do this every week?
Sure.
Everybody wants it every week.
Yeah. Should put a donate button up for camera equipment. So for Isaiah. But yeah, there you go. It's the finished product for creme brulee. Before you serve this, you want to let it kind of rest for about 5 minutes. Let it cool off, and yeah.
Clayton asked, Chef, can you send us a list of what the ingredients are in the butter mix?
Right, I can. It's I think I gave you a list of ingredients for the rub, but not for the butter, and so I'll go ahead and follow up with an email to that or a comment on the post. So if you're making compound butter, you definitely want to let the butter soften naturally at room temperature. If you try to melt it and then do it, it separates. Which has a whole other set of uses. I mean, if you separate butter, and you get the ghee and the whey separated, you can certainly use it for higher cooking temperature. But for the sake of making a compound butter, you want to keep it at room temp. So,
I also have people on Instagram saying they'd like it weekly.
what? Sorry,
That they want it weekly as well.
weekly as well.
For
Awesome.
each
Yeah.
people.
Fun to do that. So, yeah, that's our plan right now, is to kind of keep us active. And for those of you that are joining that aren't here on site, every week we're doing some group buying using our purchasing power as a large organization to provide meal baskets to our staff and the ability to buy groceries through our vendors at cost. This just has allowed us to keep our staff from having to make trips into town unnecessarily. For those of us that have been furloughed or laid off, it allows us to make our money go a little further. So, I mean, if you run a camp, or you are interested in doing something similar, or say, for instance, you live in the community around us but not at Glorietta and you're interested, reach out to us. Certainly could include you in that process. So,
A few more comments. Danielle said, "Thank you, Chef. This was such a great treat to do, to bring us all together as a community."
I'd like to know, does everybody have their creme brulees out of the oven yet?
Jeannie would rather probably not comment on her creme brulee. She said you would probably gasp.
It's going to taste good anyway. Be fine. So,
And then Steph says, if she gives up on the creme brulee for a bit, will it mess it up if I put it back in the oven later?
it could mess it up. As long as it's to temp, it will set up in the fridge overnight. For those of you, if you've cooked it too long and it has too much of a brown crust, you can peel the crust off, and that does help a little bit. So,
Can you use coconut sugar for your creme brulee?
I have found that coconut sugar seeps and makes it grainy. It's got a lot of residual moisture or something like that, the way it reacts to the cream. So, I also find you have to use like twice as much coconut sugar to make it taste right, but you certainly could. If you're wanting to use something that has basically a higher sweetness to calorie, sort of for like agave syrup works really well in creme brulee. You can use honey. There's instead of coconut sugar, I would probably recommend using something called jaggery, which you can find in Mexican cuisine, or it comes from Indian or like North African cuisine. It's palm sugar or coconut palm sugar that's not processed, so it's just a big lump of like brownish sugar. So it has a lot of the molasses quality still in it, and it works pretty well.
And Jenny said, what temp is the meat supposed to get in order to remove it from the oven? Where has Chef been?
120 degrees. So
120?
yeah, if you want it rare. If you want it more than that, if you want it medium rare, I'd let it sit to 130. If you want it well done, I'd probably let it sit until about 140 degrees, and it's going to rise up as it finishes. Yeah. But you can see here we pulled it to 120 degrees, and it's rested out to medium rare. So, I mean, some of these are even like browning a little bit from the heat. So, but yeah, as we cut into it, it'll be about medium rare.
People are saying the meat is fantastic. It turned out great.
Good. All right. So we're going to go ahead and sign off and have dinner. See you next week. Thanks.